Welcome to the Presumption podcast with your co-hosts, me, Sara Azari, and Jim Griffin. Hi, Jim.
Hey, good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm here on the East Coast, and it's afternoon here. So
I'm on the Best Coast, and it's afternoon here too. Some folks know you, Jim, as the bad guy who represented the really, really bad guy, Alex Murdaugh, earlier this year in his murder trial. And I know you as one of the greatest criminal defense attorneys that I've met in my career, who really kicks ass for his clients 24/7. You're a hardworking guy. I appreciate that. And you're also a great new colleague and resource to me. I've relied on you many times since I've met you for my own cases, for my own issues. And so I'm so incredibly honored that we're doing this together. I have been asked over the years, I've been doing media for 15 years. I've been asked to do podcasts. Production companies have asked me, other colleagues have asked me, and I just never really quite saw a real purpose to it. There's so many podcasts out there until, not too long ago, you and I were talking and we just thought there has to be this podcast that we're now doing together. So I'm so incredibly thankful and grateful to you and honored to do this with you. And so for those of us who really for those of us out there who need to get to know us, you and me, we need to just give a brief introduction. So I'm going to let you start, Jim. Give us a little bit of your background so our viewers can be more familiar with you.
sure, thanks, Sara. And honestly, I'm the one that's honored because this is so outside my comfort zone. It's not what I do, and so you're going to have to be patient with me as we work through this. So, Sara, I've been practicing laws since 1987. So, what's that make? 36 years. It's hard to say. I'll be turning 61 in 2 days, and so as we mark these milestones over the course of my career, I've been at the U.S. Attorney's Office. I was a white collar prosecutor. For the most part, I haven't, and also part of my career is done some state level prosecution on a part-time basis, mostly. Right out of law school, frankly, I went to work for Big Law, a big law firm in South Carolina, which at the time, in those days, I think there were 45 lawyers, and so that's a very small firm. That firm today has thousands of attorneys, but I stayed there for a few years, and then I transitioned and I clerked for a federal judge, and from there I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and then after I left there, I hung out a shingle on Main Street in Columbia, South Carolina, and I like to call myself a street lawyer, and I think that's we do it the old-fashioned way here in South Carolina, and although I'm not limited here, I've tried cases, all over the country. A fair amount in Texas, some in the Northeast, some in Florida. I've had a lot of success and a lot of failures over the years, but I, y'all know me for the most part who's tuning in from the Murdaugh case, and we'll talk about that more, later. But frankly, Sara, as we, talk through this is not a Murdaugh or Murdaugh, however you want to pronounce it. It's Murdaugh, frankly, but this is not a Murdaugh podcast. This is a much bigger platform, and that's why I'm interested in it. And although we will be touching upon the Murdaugh case.
Yeah, of course, because this is the first episode, and I think everyone wants to hear, so how our mission in this podcast fits within the Murdaugh story, or how the Murdaugh story fits within our podcast. But I've been practicing law 19 years. I'm also a criminal defense attorney, trial attorney. 19 plus your 36 makes how many in aggregate for both of us?
I was an econ major, but 55 years, I suspect.
Dang. Okay. So our viewers are getting 55 years worth of expertise in criminal trial work. And Jim, as that bonus of being a prosecutor early in his career, I was very lucky that when I graduated law school, I initially worked for a very big international law firm, Baker McKenzie, down in Brazil. I did not do criminal defense. I got very bored very quickly because my passion was to really perform in a courtroom. And, criminal law and procedure was always my passion. I was lucky that I had some of the country's top attorneys willing to take me under their wings, and not just to sit at a desk and pop out motions, but to really throw me into cases and into the courtroom and allow me to grow and learn in a way that I would if I was in a public defender's office or a DA's office, but with a little better pay, And I was able to bring in cases and network and get to know other lawyers in the community. And so slowly my practice grew and I went out on my own. And so I'm based in LA. Like Jim, I take cases all over the country. Most of my cases these days are white collar federal cases, but I still do state work. I don't know, Jim, what you meant by street lawyer, but it sounds like we're both street lawyers. I don't know.
Right.
Anyway, one thing that's interesting is that not too long ago, I was criticized on Twitter that I'm anti-victim. I'm anti this, I don't want this guy to recover or whatnot. A fun fact for those of you who don't know out there is that, on occasion, I do represent victims of domestic abuse and sexual assault upon very, very thorough vetting. These are people that, have tried to make reports with the police and their case doesn't get attention. They need somebody to step in, do a thorough investigation, navigate the system, and help them get their, complaints filed. And so I do represent victims on occasion. For the last 15 years, you've probably seen me bounce around different networks, a lot on CNN, HLN. My media career started back when the TV Guide Network existed. And I think my first commentary was on Dr. Murphy, Michael Jackson's doctor, who was charged with murder in Los Angeles. And so for the last several years, I have been doing legal analysis on docuseries, on cable news networks, local news networks, radio, Sirius, all of it. And it wasn't until recent where I got signed up by News Nation because I just felt that it was really on brand. Their mission is to stay in the middle, to be very factual, and that's really been my mission in what I do in media. But what I really, it wasn't until recently that I've been compensated for this work. And I did it because I really enjoy it. I enjoy it because there's an educational component to it. The ability to unpack complex legal issues and stories that make headlines in a way that a layperson can understand is really my second passion, aside from my clients. And so I am extremely careful not to cross the line between my cases, my clients, things I'm able to comment on versus not. So I walk a very fine line when it comes to conflicts in my mind between what I do and what I'm asked to talk about. I do have a sort of a niche, high profile practice where I get obviously I'm in Los Angeles, so I get celebrities from time to time, but it's really very specific to Me Too claims against high profile individuals, primarily in the entertainment business. And they come to me under the utmost confidentiality before the allegations become public. So the idea is to investigate, mitigate, not litigate, and not make it public so that, I could help as a component of their defense in preserving their privacy and, of course, their reputation and their careers. So anyway, this is the first time I'm hosting a podcast. I've been on a lot of podcasts, and there's nobody better than you to do it with, Jim. And there's one other person that's very important to us, and that is our producer extraordinaire, Matt Fondelaire.
Hey, what's up?
Hey, Matt.
I'm sitting here at the bottom of the screen on YouTube here, just biting for a chance to come on air and say hi.
So Matt, we've got the country covered now. So Sarah's out west in LA. I'm East Coast in South Carolina, and you are where?
I am smack dab in the middle, Austin, Texas. So
Awesome.
I'm from LA originally. I'm one of the 2 million plus people who've left California in the last 2 years. So I'm here in the only part of Texas that's exactly like Los Angeles, Austin, Texas. Loving it out here. And for people who haven't heard my voice before, I've been in the podcast industry for well over a decade. I worked for a comedian and New York Times bestselling author named Adam Carolla, so a radio, TV personality. And I also write true crime stories for another podcast called Sword and Scale. So I have sort of a strange career, a little bit of comedy, a little bit of crime. Sara, you mentioned being able to explain things to the layperson. I feel like I will be the stand-in layperson to the average listener because I have no legal background. Like I said, I've researched a lot of true crime cases where, frankly, I'm focused on the person who did it and what a terrible person they are, which is really going to be quite the opposite of the message of this show. So it's going to be
you're in for a
fun
treat. You're in
I
for
am.
a treat.
I'm super excited. So I met Sara through a mutual acquaintance and colleague, but I'm just curious, how did you guys first meet?
Jim, you go first.
Yeah, sure, Matt. But before I go to that, I just want you to know that your role is very important in this podcast, because I'd look at you as the traffic cop, and you've got to give the red light to Sara to give me a chance to talk like you just did, and I appreciate that.
What?
All right, well, I'll try to keep the train rolling here. You know, if you see me frantically scribbling notes or looking confused or scared, that's just me trying to keep this thing going.
So, Sara and I have mutual colleagues, friends in the business, and during the trial, you know, on weekends, I mean, it was covered so extensively in the press. So every you know, it was live. You know, on cable channels, streaming channels, and then there were a lot of talk shows in the evening about the case. And then there was a lot of online media discussions. And on the weekends, I would try to, you know, catch up with that just to see, you know, what the reaction was. And through that, I was exposed to Sara. And so we got to know each other, you know, frankly, through the trial. And I reached out to her. She reached out to me, questions she had that, and frankly, you know, it was helpful, I thought, to get a correct perspective out in the media during the trial. And so she was a very big advocate for the defense. Although she called it the way she saw it, and when we didn't do a very good job, she was critical of us. But you know, I saw more of that later, but frankly, you know, we've met over, you know, from the Murdaugh case, but we have a lot of mutual friends, and I'm not going to name them all, but she has, and when she talked about her background, I can tell you, she really is a trailblazer, because not many women street lawyers out there who practice criminal defense at her level exist in this country. And she's been doing it for 20 years. And so, and frankly, I was reluctant after coming out of the trial to do any podcast, and there was a podcast that reached out to her, and she asked if I would go on with her, and frankly, you know, that was the impetus, in my view, of this journey that we're about to undertake. I think I enjoyed that segment, and looking forward to further discussion about a lot of other cases and other issues.
So can I give my version real quick? It's a little different than yours.
Let's hear the truth. Nothing but the truth. So help you God.
Right. Well, the viewers are the jurors, right? Our jurors. And Matt, you're the judge. So, you know, I was absolutely, well, let me start with where I agree with you. I think people don't really understand the camaraderie that exists between defense attorneys, criminal defense attorneys. Those of us who are small, most of us are small practitioners, and we, doing what we do for over a number of years, we get to know people, even if they're smack across the country. Somehow, if we have a matter there, we need to use a conference room. We really do bond. And Jim and I both, I'm a life member. Jim sort of dwindled out, but we're both members of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. Through that association, we have a lot of contacts. But really what happened was, when the Murdaugh murders occurred on June 7, 2021, I was fascinated by the story. And the two other stories I was fascinated by was the O.J. Simpson case and then the Menendez brothers. And that was before I became an attorney. There was something about the Murdaugh case that was, probably because it was so salacious, the way that was presented in media, that really grabbed my attention. I thought, what is going on here? You know, and I talked about it to Chris Cuomo, and he was equally fascinated by it. And we really sort of independently followed the case. And, you know, when the trial started, you know, I was asked to be on his panel, which I did. And I literally was handicapped the entire trial. I was not really getting much done except for watching the trial every day. Would get absolute anxiety if I missed even, you know, during a bathroom break or something. So I was watching, I was live tweeting, I was providing analysis that I was getting ready and doing it on TV. And I think it was at the end of the first week or so. Of course, I got to know you, you know, doing what you do in the courtroom. I'd not necessarily heard of you before, despite our mutual acquaintances. And then I saw this like Hope Griffin on Twitter, who is your number one fan and your eldest daughter, retweet me something where there was a connection. And I go, huh. I clicked on her picture. She kind of looked like you. And I said, I DM'd her. I said, is this your father? And she said, yes. And I said, well, he's doing a damn good job. And I did, that must have been before I got mad at you for not objecting to a bunch of stuff. And I was like, why are they not objecting? So yes, I was critical of you guys as well, because I'm honest. But Hope reached out to me. And then you're right. I think it was a week later or so where you reached out to me. And at that point, you knew about me being in LA. Geragos and I had shared our office, and you complimented me on my analysis. And I thought, well, I ain't doing this for you, boo. This is just how I see it. But, you know, but it was nice to get the validation from you. And of course, me being the bold, you know, you give me an inch, I take a mile person. I said, hey, I have a lot of legal questions for you that are under South Carolina law, and I don't want to be inaccurate. Would you mind talking to me about some of these questions? And you were really gracious. When I'm in trial, I go under a rock, and you really gave me a lot of time and answered my questions. So I'm ever grateful to you for that, ever so grateful to you for that.
Yeah.
But that's really how we connected.
Sounds like it's really Twitter brought you guys together. Usually Twitter tears people apart, but this is like the crux of your relationship.
Exactly right. Twitter is good for some things. There's a silver lining to Twitter. But let's talk about this podcast.
I will say this, you know, having tried that case live on whatever platforms many people wanted to watch, they knew exactly when the lunch break was. They knew exactly when court got out. And I think Sara gave me like 3 minutes before my phone would blow up. So she was not bashful about calling and having like, why'd y'all just do this? Or why'd you do that? And so anyway, her perspective was very interesting and helpful. But honestly, you know, she is one who runs at top speed all the time, and she is not bashful about. And honestly, you know, it's not like my phone was blowing up. My kids were staying away from me, not to bother me during the trial. My wife, you know, it was like I was in the zone of silence. But then Sara would blow up my phone every 2 minutes as soon as
my God, now I'm getting guilt.
No, you know, but that's
oh, good
you know,
Lord.
So yeah, but honestly, when you're in something like that, Matt, I mean, you're in a cocoon, and it really is helpful to get perspective of those who are not in the same cocoon with you, and give you a different perspective, or you know, a wake up call, or you know, it's very helpful. So I mean, that's how Sara and I met, I believe, and I don't know how much Hope paid you to give her a big shout out, but no, she is thankful you did.
No, that's true. I mean, I think I'm pretty 99% sure I connected with her first, and then quickly thereafter you. And I'm so grateful to you for, you know, walking me through some of the things that South Carolina law. I mean, listen, if I had a trial down where you practice, I would have to get local counsel. Sure, I know how to cross-examine and do an opening statement and a closing argument, but you know, I don't know your specific laws. So I really am, like I said at the beginning, I'm so committed to being accurate, and I really hate when people are inaccurate. That like you said, I wasn't bashful, and you indulged, so that was nice. So the presumption of innocence, I call it the presumption of innocence, and Jim saying, it might be the assumption of guilt. The presumption of innocence goes hand in hand with the prosecution's burden, the highest burden in our criminal justice system, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And, it is really a cardinal principle that every person that is accused of a crime is presumed to be innocent unless and until his or her guilt is established beyond a reasonable doubt. Simply that. So if you're shackled, if you're wearing orange jumpsuit, whatever it is, if you have tattoos coming up all the way up your neck, you're still presumed innocent. And it's not just a formality. It's a matter of the most important substance.
I don't understand what the alternative would be. Like, just because somebody handcuffed you, that's it? You're just going to prison? Like, people are so against the idea of, an alleged criminal having a defense. But to me, that just seems like one of the most important foundations of our judicial system. If you were ever accused of a crime, you would certainly want somebody to offer up a strong defense of you. So I just find it so interesting that people, especially these days, are just sort of like immune to this idea.
Yeah. Well, Matt, I mean, you're right about it, but I've been trying cases for 30 plus years. And, I mean, as a defense lawyer, one of the things we tell jurors is that we're about to ask you to do something that's not natural. I mean, it's natural to assume that once someone is sitting in a courtroom, it's gone that far that person is likely guilty of what they did, because there are all these checks and balances, and people have faith in the criminal justice system, rightfully so. But when they get in the box and they understand the significance of the constitutional protections, and it's not, and we explain them as if, it's all of the protections that citizens of the United States have, and it's not just limited to presumption of innocence. It's the right to bear arms. It's the right to freedom of speech. It's the right to go to the church of your choice or not go to the church of your choice. And they're all on equal footing. And we have been successful over the years of jurors understanding that and applying that in the actual trials. I think what we're doing here and what we're trying to point out is, and as we go through, and examine big media cases and how the media spotlight and how much information is now being disseminated, and misinformation is being disseminated, how it erodes a juror's ability to put all that noise aside and follow the law. And we felt like that was what we had experienced in the Murdaugh case. And so we're going to talk about that more in a little bit, and more cases similar to that. But I can tell you, early on in my legal career, as doing criminal defense work, I tried a case outside of Houston, Texas, in Beaumont, Texas, and it was a high profile case. It was a national story. Had been on 60 Minutes. It had been on Ted Koppel, World News Tonight. It had been on all the shows, but that was all there was to really have information disseminated about that case. And as we're picking a jury in federal court in Beaumont, which we had the ability as attorneys to ask jurors questions, and after the prosecution went through their voir dire, no one acknowledged knowing anything about the case. And I get up and I said, this case has been on 60 Minutes. Are you saying none of y'all watch that? And then a few hands would go up, and then you would explore. But and then we were able to get those jurors off. And frankly, we had a fair jury and we got a defense verdict. In the Murdaugh case, you couldn't find anybody in the state of South Carolina, probably the country, who didn't know about the case. And so because it just, part of the reason was the nature of the case, but also there's just so much more information being bombarded upon, prospective jurors now, and it's information. And so, it's real, it's concerning as to where we are headed in this, in the whole criminal justice system. You'll never get a jury on a high profile case that hasn't learned information and misinformation, and you're
Right.
asking them to put all that information aside, and oftentimes it's not possible.
I mean, I guess that is the concern, is that the presumption of innocence has been eroded by the role that media, social media, online sleuths are playing in true crime, in this true crime space, the genre. And I actually spoke about this yesterday on News Nation. It's like, on the one hand, it's making it easier to find, for example, a missing person. It's making it easier to find Gabby Petito's body, for example. But on the other hand, it is convicting people like Murdaugh and Brian Kohberger. There is no place in this country that these guys your client could have, or Kohberger could get a fair trial. And so that is really one of the main reasons that you and I, Jim, decided to do this podcast. So even though we will be covering a wide array of cases in and out of the headlines, we are going to very often hit on these issues, the role that the media plays in the presumption of innocence and what you call the assumption of guilt, as well as the forgotten disease, which is mental illness and addiction, and how it's sort of lost in the criminal justice system. Both of these issues were hot topics in the trial of Alex Murdaugh. So there's nobody better than you to spin this off. And also, I think this might be the only time, or one of the only times, or maybe the only time, that you and I are going to discuss this on this podcast, because obviously Murdaugh has a federal indictment pending. He has state financial charges pending that carry LWOP. He has an appeal pending. And so I don't want you to be in a position where you have to, cross a line that I don't like to cross. So I think that it makes sense to talk about the issues that are at the crux of this podcast today, but we're probably not going to visit Murdaugh for a long time after this.
Right.
So let's talk about the media, the role of the media in Murdaugh.
Actually, before you do that, let me just suggest that we take a real quick break here for
Sure.
the days that we get some fantabulous sponsors. We'll hear from one of them. So we'll be right back, and we will jump right into this fascinating case.
Jim, I mean, this trial was 6+ weeks long, and obviously there was a media circus at Waterboro courthouse, and from Court TV to News Nation to CNN, everybody was talking about the Alex Murdaugh trial, and I know that there's some instances where media actually helps the defendant. During the Michael Jackson trial, before he went to trial, his stock was so low, but during the trial, his stock soared again, and people started to change their views about him. In your case, you had almost 2 years of documentaries, of podcasts that had really sort of told a narrative about Murdaugh and his family that actually, when you looked at the evidence in the trial, didn't really check out. How do you think the media attention around the Murdaugh case damaged your client's ability to get a fair trial, and also impacted, the jurors and what
Sure.
ended up happening?
Yeah. So, Sarah, I'd like to address that at two levels. One is pre-trial publicity, and then the second, all the publicity during the trial, frankly. But, I originally met Alec through representing his son, Paul, who was in a boating accident where this beautiful young woman lost her life. And Paul and 5 of his friends went out one evening in January, believe it or not, on a small center console boat to Oyster Roast on a small island not far from their family's river house. And they didn't make it back. The boat collided into a bridge. This young woman lost her life. Ultimately, Paul was charged with felony boating under the influence and causing death and serious bodily injury. Those are very serious charges. And that case got significant amount of local media attention. It was not a national case whatsoever, but it was a highly watched criminal case for the area, for no other reason than the Murdaugh family name, prosecutors. Paul Murdaugh is now very serious charges, could do 25 years in prison if he's convicted, and so the focus was, is he going to get away with it? Is he going to get away with it? And that was a local media attention. And then comes June 7th, 2021, when Paul was murdered. His mother, Maggie, was murdered at the estate on Moselle in Colleton County. And at that point, the case went from a local news story to a national news story. And it was an overnight sensation. And it was shocking to everyone, but it had all the trappings of, what the news wants to sell, and because it was a very prominent family, and then tragedy, and it was related to, people thought that perhaps it was in retaliation to the boating accident, and that was a narrative that people were following, and a lot of journalists descended upon Hampton County and the area. And so Alex Brothers went on Good Morning America and, addressed, Alex's relationship with Maggie and Paul. And so that was, a big story, and it continued to be, told. And then here comes September, Labor Day weekend, when Alec is shot in the head on the side of the road, who, we now know is his source for drugs, and Alex had a drug addiction, and once that happened, I mean, it was a red hot story, and you had documentaries coming in from different outlets, HBO Max, Netflix, and a lot of other news coverage. It was nothing I've ever seen before, and I doubt there are a few cases like it in the country, but it was red hot. And the narrative going into it was, in Alex Murdaugh's history, there are 5 people that are dead, for example. I mean, so death and destruction follows him everywhere. And it was so unfortunate. And the 5 people, so you start with Maggie and Paul, that's 2. And you start with this beautiful young woman, Mallory Beach, that's 3. Then you have this housekeeper who died on the property, and there was an insurance claim, and her name was Gloria Satterfield, so that's 4. And then out of rumor, there's this kid, Stephen Smith, who died on the side of the road, but it was all being portrayed as Alex Murdaugh's, in his circle, there are 5 dead bodies. And so what kind of guy is this? And you lay this over the financial crime information and the drug addiction, and then people are looking for motive for Alec to have killed his wife and son. And then you have a lot of irresponsible journalists writing stories that they're just fabricated. Like Alec had, that his wife Maggie was seeking a divorce and had visited divorce attorneys, and that there was a big life insurance policy out there, and all of this information was in the public domain, and it was false. Particularly all the information about Maggie and life insurance.
Jim, I didn't watch the Netflix documentary until after the trial, but I had watched the HBO documentary a couple times. And I had a little checklist of things because I just wanted to see if the evidence comes in that supports them. And I mean, there was a number of things that were not in evidence, that were not true, like you said, fabricated. And so one of the things that stuck out to me was, this idea that Maggie was getting a divorce. This was a very unhappy marriage, etc. What in your mind was probably the biggest misinformation that you think media put out there that was not at all in evidence?
And that Maggie was seeking a divorce, had hired a forensic accountant, that and then there was this mysterious text message that Maggie had texted her friend of hers and said, it's very suspicious that Alec wants me to come to Moselle.
Right,
I mean,
right.
none of
That
that
never
was
came in. Yeah, that never. I was
none of
looking
that
for
was
that.
true.
Yeah.
None of that was true.
Yeah.
I can tell you that you know, I don't know how hard the FBI has looked for Jimmy Hoffa's body, but I do know how hard SLED looked for a divorce lawyer that Maggie had consulted with, and it just does not exist. I mean, civil lawyers subpoenaed every divorce lawyer in the state of South Carolina trying to get, a Maggie Murdaugh file. I mean, it just did not exist. It was not there. But
is the idea to just kind of be riling people up and theoretically this gets to members of the jury and influences their decision because they're not supposed to really know about any of this stuff to be fair and impartial, right?
Well, that's the thing, Matt. I mean, everybody knew about this stuff.
Right.
I mean, it just permeated the news cycle. It permeated the social media. You couldn't find a person who didn't know something about it.
To be truthful, even I, who, I know the media game and I don't really always buy what's being presented, I really believe that this was some extremely wealthy, powerful family. I mean, that's really what was sold to us, and at the end of the day, I mean, they had some money, but they weren't like balling down there, and they weren't, they were a generation of lawyers in that area. So they were powerful in terms of running the legal system down there, but they were not what they were portrayed to be. And the idea that media gave to all of us about them was completely different than the reality. But Jim, speaking of media, there was also a lot of criticism of, which I hate, defense lawyers, our job is so hard. And it's so easy for other people to just be like, why'd you do that? I mean, yeah, of course I was like, why didn't you object? But more than that, your closing sucked and whatever. People get really crazy with criticism. And how did you deal with seeing that stuff being said? Like, one of the things that people were saying about you is that Jim Griffin, he keeps opening that door. I'm like, that damn door has loose hinges. I mean, what the hell's going on? But you were like the troublemaker of the defense team, and you were constantly being criticized. Well, like, how did you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean that was not a problem whatsoever during the trial because you're in a cocoon, and so I really wasn't subjected to that. I didn't really know about that. I still don't know a lot about that. I mean, one thing I have vowed to do is never watch the trial. I mean, it's I've not watched the trial, not from start to finish, because I don't have 6 weeks to devote to it. I already spent 6 weeks doing that, and there's, as you know, and as a lawyer, the most gut-wrenching experience is reading your closing argument and on paper when you're doing an appeal. It's like, I can't believe I thought I was a lot better than that. You think you're Clarence Darrow after you do it, and then you read it, and you feel like you're Uncle Fester or somebody.
But you never, or my cousin Vinny, you never saw any of the criticisms during the trial. That's good.
Not much.
Didn't Google your name? Let's come on.
No, the only
Did you Google your name?
I'll tell you that, I did read Kathleen Parker's story about me in the Washington Post, as everyone knows. And then I made the mistake of, like, I said, well, this is a damn good article. And, I want to save this. How can I save it? So I thought I retweeted it. I've been educated. That was not a tweet. I shared the article on my Twitter. And then I was chastised, rightfully so, by Judge Newman when I went in court the following week. And, but I will say I went from like 1,800 Twitter followers to like 4,800 in 2 hours.
Nice.
And so if there's a lesson there, is don't tweet articles about yourself in trial unless you want to build up Twitter followers. But I really stayed in the cocoon for the most part. I did speak with you, Sarah, on, not every day, every hour, but other than that, getting back to media with a trial. So that was pre-trial. Leading up to it, there was all this misinformation, and and Sarah, we talked about this.
Well, what about venue shopping? I mean, obviously you were concerned about Alec getting a fair jury, a jury that is not super familiar with this case. And I understand that you guys had tried to move the venue. What was that experience like? I mean, were you able to find any county around Colleton where you could have a fair trial?
So, I mean, we never made a motion to transfer a venue. And frankly, you don't transfer a venue. What you do is you get a jury from outside the venue, you ship them in, and you lock them up in a hotel room. And so that was the option. Although we did focus groups around the state.
Yeah.
There was really no area, frankly, around the state that didn't people didn't know about this case. I mean, you could not know about it if you talk to people and read. So, and honestly, I'm not, I'll just throw this out there without qualifying or saying how much weight it had, but people who knew Alec knew the relationship he had with his family. And you can think people can kill their wives. I mean, it happens every day, but it's not normal for someone to kill their son. Unless it's some violence or some dementia or some derangement or some just a domestic violence situation. And people in the area knew how close Alec was, we believe, to his sons and his family, and that was his life. And so we had to temper the decision to bring a jury from outside the area who still knew about the case, plant them in a hotel room, bring them to court, put them back in a hotel room. And that generally is a angry jury after a number of weeks. And so anyway, that's the decision we made. We didn't try to get a different jury from another part of the state, but which goes to the next point. I don't care where we would have gotten a jury from. What those jurors went through and the pressure that, intentionally, unintentionally, explicit, implicitly, that they were under to return a verdict of guilty, in my opinion, was, not irresistible, but hard to overcome. I mean, every day they pulled up in a van. So they met off site. They pulled up in a van. Colleton County Sheriff's Department transported the jury to the courthouse. They went by tent after tent after tent of network TV correspondents to court TV to the local TV stations. And I think you showed some of the gallery out there. And then as the trial wore on, Matt, I mean, they were lining up at 5 a.m. to get in. And then the courtroom would be packed. And not only, and it became like a spectator event in the courtroom in that, the judge would rule against us, or the judge would, reprimand me for, opening the door or something.
Being a bad boy.
And
listen,
the jurors were laughing. I mean, and the gallery was laughing and clapping. And I mean,
that's
it was
wild.
It was upsetting. And so then we would we didn't want to say it in front of the jury, but we would raise it with the judge. The judge would reprimand the audience and said, if you make noise and express yourself, you're going to be removed. And guess what? Another 100 people came in the next day who weren't there the day before who got that admonishment. So it'd be all over again. And then, and so, the jurors sitting in there in the box, they see all these people, they see the circus atmosphere out there, and they know the world is watching, and they hear all this information going in. There's 5 dead bodies in Alex Murdaugh's past. And now they hear at trial, he's stolen all this money. And so,
listen, despite that, okay, this brings me to the second mission of the Presumption podcast. I thought that Alex Murdaugh's addiction, which was absolutely real, would play a much bigger role and at least tug at the heart of one juror. And I just want to briefly hit on this. Addiction is, I have experience with addiction and sobriety, 12-step program. Thankfully, I went through what I went through, where I could still say I was young and stupid. I learned a lot in sobriety, and I I think got a lot more even out of therapy. But I've had it around me. I've had it, I had it in my clients. I've had it among friends. And so I know that, you too, Jim, have personal experience. But when I heard about Murdaugh's addiction, I remember speaking to you about it and saying, this is going to color the entire defense. There's got to be at least one juror, despite all the misinformation, the brainwashing, and all that went on by media, that is going to understand that addict behavior is irrational. And so, again, what Murdaugh did was lie, cheat, steal. He was a prolific liar. He was a facile cheater and a thief. I'm not saying every addict is that person, but that is very common when you're deep in addiction. You're living a dual life, you're living a lie, and therefore everything you do is cheat, lie, and steal and cover up. And so, I mean, I'm not unique. It's not like, oh, I have this insight other people don't. And I was shocked that people still came out of that trial saying, oh, that was BS too. He was lying about that too. And people were taking out their calculators and going, how much, what was the check he wrote to cousin Eddie? Because that means the pills were X number of dollars on the street divided by that check. That's a lot of pills. And it's like, no. Addicts don't, you can't start doing the math, because the money that gets paid out suddenly becomes about supporting the drug dealer. Making the drug dealer stay quiet and not, there's all kinds of things you end up paying for besides the actual pills you're buying. I don't have pill experience, but I know from my clients. So I was surprised that it did nothing. What was your reaction to the jury's reaction to his addiction? Because you argued it tremendously.
Yeah, and I guess we need to set the stage for the person who was in the Amazon for the last year and didn't see any of the trial. But the big issue at trial was when Alec was first confronted or asked from law enforcement, when's the last time you saw your wife and son? He had said after dinner, and later on it was disclosed, and there was a video from his son Paul's phone that
Alec, the kennel video, the kennel lie.
Yeah, actually had been down at the kennel with Maggie and Paul at some point in time when he said he was at home on the couch, yet he wasn't there. And so he lied about his whereabouts. That came out during the trial. And frankly, the jury never got over that lie. And I don't think they looked beyond that lie. And I think that lie, in my assessment, was what convicted him and nothing more. The jury overlooked a lot of exculpatory evidence because they couldn't in their own mind accept any explanation as why he would have lied about not being there. And
so in other words, they didn't care that he has an addiction, that they didn't care about that.
So it's a different. I think I'm not disagreeing with you, but what I've learned when I came out of the trial is my email inbox was full of people who had addiction, who had addicts as friends, who had addicts as family, who readily accepted that he lied because addicts lie all the time. And so they were willing to accept the reason that he lied, and he testified on the stand that he just, this paranoia overcame him. And then once he lied the first time, he had, I think what he said from the stand, what tangled web we weave once we set out to deceive. And I couldn't say it any better. But the people who had some addiction in their background accepted that. And I have gotten the most uplifting emails from those folks.
Yeah. Look, when he said
who don't have that experience can't accept it. And whether this jury had any of those experiences in their background, we don't know. It was not something that was asked because we didn't think this evidence was coming in during the trial, and we couldn't in our jury questionnaire ask jurors, do you have friends who stole money and who were addicts and lied about it or anything like that? We argued strenuously that the theft and the drugs should not come into evidence. But once the theft of client money came into evidence, the drugs was the explanation for that.
Absolutely. And him saying, I am on the stand, I am 500 something days sober.
We actually have a clip of that if you guys want to watch that real quick.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yep.
Battling for quite some time.
As long as I can remember.
How long have you been drug-free, opioid-free?
535 days. And I'm very proud of that.
535 days is a long time to be sober.
Yeah, and Sarah and Matt in that questioning, I also asked him, I said, were you an addict? And he corrected me, said, I am an addict.
I am an addict.
And
because
so
he acknowledged that the addiction is there. It's that he's a sober addict. And anybody that has had that in their family understands what that is. And that there's no way you can look at that and say, it's BS. It's not genuine. But like you said, Jim, I think what did him in was the kennel lie. I mean, they really didn't need to hear it. They didn't want to hear about anything else because that to them was absolute consciousness of guilt. But
let me just put a pitch in for Alec. At that time, it was 500 and some odd days. He's still drug free. He is in a place where, frankly, drugs are prevalent. Last time I went to see him, as you go into the area where he is, there's a vending machine for Narcan. I was like,
oh my God,
why is there Narcan here? They said, we give it to every inmate who leaves, so that, if they OD. And the person who was escorting me around said, there's so much drugs here that we have to use it on a daily basis for overdoses within the prison. I mean, the drugs are prevalent where he is, and he is drug free. And so he's serious about battling his addiction. People would think, oh, he's in prison, he has no opportunity, but nothing could be further from the truth. So I just want to throw that out.
I have one question that I have not asked you, believe it or not, even though you said I'm not, I'm not bashful. There's one question I've not asked you that I'm curious about. I think our viewers would be curious about too. There was one blockbuster moment in this entire trial, both sides. I mean, there was just one blockbuster moment, and that was your cross-examination of Agent Owens, the sled agent, who was basically, he's like the icon of ineptitude, frankly. And you said, so you used trickery on the grand jury, something to that effect. Matt,
let's watch it. Yeah, we got it right here. Let's see.
When you told Alec that there were multiple weapons loaded with that same load, buckshot and birdshot, I mean, was that an investigative tool, or were you just under the misimpression that was the case?
Investigative tool.
So you lied to him.
I'm allowed to use trickery to elicit a response.
I understand. So you're trying to trick him. Agreed?
I'm allowed to use trickery to elicit a response. Yes.
And you're allowed to do it, and you did it.
Yes.
Jim's like, let me make sure.
But you also testified under oath in front of the state grand jury. You said basically the same thing, that there were 4 shotguns on the Moselle property and they were loaded with buckshot and turkey load.
Yes.
Now, were you mistaken then, or were you trying to trick the state grand jury?
Damn. Now, Jim, you said you're not watching your performance, but that was chef's kiss.
It was amazing.
Well done.
Jim,
Well, it's still cringeworthy in my book, but I appreciate that.
No, there's nothing to cringe about. That was amazing. Did you know? I mean, did you know you were going to elicit that answer? Because when we go into a cross-examination, we have some expectation that the guy's going to get trapped. And,
right.
It's not about the answer. It's about the point that we make in the question. So did you know you're going to end up with that trickery stuff?
He gave me trickery, right? I mean, that was his word, right. and I appreciated that. And I'm sure he regrets saying the word trickery. I think he was coached, though, because, I mean, it was, you prepared cross-examination. So what you want to do is, not only do you want to know the answer before you ask it, right. But you want to know that if he doesn't agree with the answer, that you can prove that he's lying. And so I had, I had the documents where, so we knew what guns were found, and we knew what guns were
Right,
found.
but did you have the grand jury transcript? Because I know some states don't.
So so actually there are two separate grand juries. There was a statewide grand jury, which there was a transcript of.
Right. Okay.
There was a county grand jury. There was no transcript of, but they did provide me his outline for his testimony at the county grand jury. So I had both of those. And so that was what I was able to, frankly, he backed off of that when I asked him, "Were you trying to trick the state grand jury?" He said, "I don't think I testified to that." So I had to whip out the transcript. He acknowledged it. And then he said, "Oh, I guess I was mistaken." And then I follow up, "Well, it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay, and people make mistakes all the time. Yeah. And people make mistakes about time because they were critical of Alex giving, he was awful in his minutes when he,
his
timeline. And the guy says, that's the most common mistake people make. And so, that was, and that was what Kathleen Parker wrote about. I love Kathleen Parker. It was a great article in the Washington Post. I should not have tweeted it out. I'm sorry, Judge Newman.
You got in trouble for that too, Jimmy G.
Never do it again.
I'm going to be calling you Matt. Matt doesn't know this. I started calling Jim Jimbo because during this trial, I learned a lot of Southern sort of terminology. One of them was Bo. I say boo a lot. I go, hey, boo, hey, boo. And so when I learned Bo, I was like, oh, I like Bo. It's like, I'm Jimbo. And then one day he goes, only my sister calls me that. I'm like, ooh, okay. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what that meant, but I was like, I better not call him that. So then it went to Jimmy G. I mean, and I have a whole list, which I hope, Jim, that because the benefit of this podcast is we're so different. One of the benefits that you're in the South, the left coast, as you said, and I love when you throw in those terms, so don't be bashful. Don't be bashful.
All right.
So we are going to be doing this weekly. We look forward to bringing in a lot of great guests. That's one of the benefits of Jim and I doing this for so long, knowing all the big players out there in the arena. But there are going to be conversations that just Jim and I will have. For example, we have Crime Time at the beginning of almost most of our episodes, where we wrap up some of the headline crime cases like Koberger, the Menendez brothers, habeas corpus writ, that kind of stuff. So we will kind of have a conversation about cases that are not yet in trial, but that are in the news. And then we go right into a special guest usually. So listen, we're doing this. We're playing along with this. We want this to work for you. We want to hear from you. What do you want to hear about? What do you like better? What do you not like? Because ultimately we will fine tune this as we go along. So
we do have an email address, by the way, if you want to email your questions to us. That is thepresumptionpod@gmail.com. thepresumptionpod@gmail.com.
Not podcast, pod.
Correct. Pod. I tried to get podcast, but you guys know how Gmail works.
And Jim, can you give our viewers the Twitter, Instagram, all that YouTube good stuff?
Can I?
Yeah.
I'll help you out, Jim.
I'm not sure I can. I'm not sure I can. I mean,
listen, we tried to make it as easy as possible. You can follow us on Twitter, on Instagram @The Presumption. We're also going to be uploading these videos onto YouTube. Obviously, subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, but you can also watch on YouTube, youtube.com/@thepresumption as well.
And so go ahead, Matt.
No,
any platform we didn't hit on. We didn't name off.
Again, just whatever you're listening to your favorite podcast on, whether it's Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or there's a million apps out there. So make sure you subscribe. That means a lot to us. And there you go.
Couple things. What cases are you following? These are questions that I have for the viewers. What cases are you following? What topics are you interested in? What do you like? What do you hate? We know there are haters out there. Jim says that his haters got haters. But most importantly, we want you to subscribe, download, and give us a good review, because we need to grow and we need to bring you all kinds of great episodes. So thanks for listening. And until next time, Jim, we rest.
We rest.